when someone's not doing the obvious thing, there's only two reasons why. One, they don't know why they're doing it, and therefore it's not that important. So that comes back down to their motivators. You bet that if a woman's showing up to do something to be a good role model for her kids and be a good mum, that's all the ammo we need to be like, great, we're going to remember how important this is. And then the second reason as to why someone wouldn't do the obvious thing is just because the step is too big. So if you're asking your client to track their entire day of food and they're not doing any of it, you've set them up for failure. Maybe you haven't taught them the basics. Maybe you haven't taught them how to organize their food for the day. The step is too big. And to set people up for success, we have to make big things seem small, achievable, and 10 out of 10, I can do this. There's no reason, no excuse, nothing that could get in the way from me ticking off this tiny little action or habit for today.
How are you? How are things? I really appreciate you doing this, Sharelle. This is awesome. So.
No, things are well, Jared. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm always excited to jump on and connect and meet some new people and just have a good conversation.
Yeah, totally. And kind of like we were talking about before I hit record is I've been following you for a minute. Like, I don't even know how long, but like I've personally enjoyed your content, but then, like we were saying, is most of the people that I chat with, and from coaching to the podcast, is mostly people that are all women, middle aged, that are struggling with this stuff. And obviously, I'm not dumb enough to think like I am a middle aged woman. So I really like to make this kind of cross thing happen, where to get people in that actually are in that category. Like I don't even know how old you are. How old are you?
Oh, I've just hit the big 30, so nice. Entering my 30s.
Nice. But either way, I really like to bring the collaboration together to kind of merge all this together. So, because you're such an interesting person, like so let me get this straight. You're a midwife, a PT, a pilot. What else? There's something else. You've got like this laundry list, and you're just now 30. How did all that happen?
Yeah, good question. You missed the most important one. I was a nurse before it all. That was where I started, sort of getting into, I guess, professionally. Like I started out as a nurse. I went to uni, did all the things that you essentially do when you finish high school. You think you've got to have it all figured out. So went to uni, became a registered nurse. And then throughout like my nursing career, I started to get interested in women's health alongside that. And when I was nursing, I was also working in a private hospital, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do some placement there in the area that they did the midwifery, which I don't know if you guys have midwives over your way. I know it's not, it's different countries classified as different things, but in Australia, a registered midwife is essentially someone that looks after women throughout all areas of life, but specifically during childbirth and those first postnatal periods. So antenatal, pregnancy, and then postnatal. That's essentially what a midwife does. So I naturally became quite interested in women's health, but then alongside doing my nursing and my midwifery, I was also competing as a bikini competitor at the time. So I was naturally in the fitness industry too. And it was just a hobby at the time. Like I really loved competing. I loved bodybuilding. I had all the books, all the articles. I was on T Nation as well. Like I was doing all the things. And I felt like I essentially had like two parallel lives where I was, working as a nurse and a midwife, but then also in my spare time, I was spending like 3 hours at the gym, training legs, which I know it's so polarizing. But yeah, I naturally had this sort of parallel life. And over time, I just started to see the disconnect between health and fitness. And naturally, I guess it's, every experience and every projection in your career leads you to where you are. But naturally, they sort of came together, and I stood away from nursing and midwifery, and it led me to where I am now. Wow,
that's awesome. That's so where'd like pilot, come into this and everything like that? That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's another random one. My dad's actually a pilot, so recreational pilot and a private pilot now. But yeah, I've been flying since I was 14, I think I started training. So I just naturally grew up with it, and I'm from the country, if you can't tell from my accent, not obviously Australian as well, but I have quite a country accent. And yeah, grew up in the country, grew up on property, on farming, and flying was just something I always grew up with. So naturally I was like, well, if we've got, some small aircrafts around, I would love to learn. And yeah, I did that. So yeah, it's really cool to be able to have that in the back pocket.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's super cool. Well, and one of the things that I wanted to chat about is because like you're such a powerhouse, like intellectually, of all this stuff, from like strength training to nutrition, periodization, and all of like the sciencey stuff, and even like your career in like bodybuilding and stuff. But then you also have this amazing, and where I really resonate with this content and this foundation of like having a great relationship with food and emotional regulation and all of that stuff. But stereotypically, those are, I hate to say it, but almost separated in so much of the industry. But for you, like that's why like my show's called Dieting from the Inside Out, because we have to bring both of these worlds together. But stereotypically, a lot of them are almost polarized. So for you, how do you bring those together for like the average person?
Yeah, it's so tricky, right? I think it's not even just polarizing in the fitness industry, it's polarizing in the world. And for me, I always think that the most self-aware person in the room holds the responsibility of controlling a lot of the conversations, because if you have the privilege to have that insight and that understanding on how people think, or that insight into thinking about your thinking, which most people don't do, they never think about their thinking. If you have the power to be able to do that and regulate your emotions, you have so much responsibility for the people around you. So for me, it's less about trying to change the world and get them to all think that way, because I think you've got to pick your battles, right? A lot of people are quite unregulated in this world and they don't want to do the inner work, and that's okay. And I think my experience, honestly, working as a nurse and a midwife showed me the real world. It showed me a lot of insight into like what the real problems are, like how important perspective is. And it's why bodybuilding for me never felt that hard. To be honest, I was like, people think dieting's hard. I'm like, and I understand it is for some people, but for me, like just, I had to grow up really quickly. I saw a lot of things that people probably won't in their life. And I think it just changed a lot of my perspective about how I view my body, the privilege I have to be in the body that I have, regardless of, I think everyone in the world wants to be a little bit leaner, right? That's natural. But yeah, I think perspective is such a gift. And for me, I was gifted that when I was quite young, before I even got into the fitness space. So I think that just shaped the way I now see myself, see others, and coach clients.
Yeah, that's awesome. For you, how would you normally approach, like obviously everyone's different, but how would you approach someone who's in that spot of where they feel like they have to pick a camp, right? It's like I either have to pick this camp over here and get shredded, or you love the way I look and feel, but my emotions are in the trash, my mental health is down the toilet, and my relationship with food is horrid, or I have to go over here and have all that stuff good, but then I'm 50 pounds heavier than I want to be. Like, how do you help like someone navigate that?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think for me, and naturally with my background, health is always going to come first to me. And there is no physical health without mental health. And I do think a lot of people that are able to control their body weight, control what they eat, think about their thinking, reflect, have a growth mindset, they're inspired to be better, and they want to make themselves better rather than punishing themselves or restricting all of the time. So for me, confidence, which is naturally what a lot of women want, it's an outcome. It's something we build over time. It's something we earn through respecting our body and through putting the work into ourselves rather than trying to just shape the external. It's usually the outcome. And for me, I honestly think that if you can build a healthy mind and a healthy body and prioritize yourself in the way that we all know we should, the physical stuff comes. You know what I mean? Like it's an outcome. But I think a lot of people are trying to fix a symptom rather than the problem. Like when people are, for example, quite overweight, they're usually misusing or mistreating nutrition and training. They're using food as like a means to their emotions, or they're using exercise as a form of punishment rather than, hey, I get to train to be stronger and be more rather than be smaller, or I get to nourish and fuel my body correctly rather than starve myself to be skinny. So they're usually using these things inside coaching that we think are the be all end all, but they are tools. They're tools to help people get to the outcomes that they want physically, and also emotionally.
I love that. I totally agree with you. Like the mantra I usually like that I've been saying lately is like, we have to diet from the inside out first before we diet for real. It's kind of where like the name of the show came from, but cause I see too many people that they're trying to like, well, let me just lose some weight now. Let me just get this stuff taken care of now. But while their mental health is in the trash, they're regulating their emotions with food, which isn't regulating them, and all these kind of things. So for you, when you say, well, we need to get these things in check and these things, as part of this whole ecosystem, for you, is there any specific strategies, tactics, habits, or specifics that you do with people around like, hey, here's how I'm going to fix your mindset. Here's some of the inner work we're going to have you do. Is there any specifics around that you find most helpful?
Yeah, really good question. It's such a can of worms, isn't it? So hard but for me, like one way that we do it inside the women's health movement is from a coaching lens specifically. When we have a new client join us, obviously you go through a bit of an assessment phase, right? To see where someone's at. They do their induction, they're usually doing some screening tools or whatever else it might be. But one thing that we actually have spent almost the last 12 months really refining and building is our goal setting process that we take a lot of clients through. And honestly, this is such a big missing gap in the coaching industry. Most people think that the client's goal is to lose 5 kilos. And whilst that might be part of their goal, it's not necessarily the bigger goal. It's not their identity-based goal. It doesn't give you practical steps to include along the way. It doesn't teach them the sequence of the goals or the habits or the actions that they need to put in place. And also as a coach, you have no idea where to focus if they just say lose 5 kilos. All you know is like eat less. What does that actually mean though? So for me, and the way that we do it from like a coaching lens is like we assess the current client and then we almost like categorize and see where they're at. And probably what you're speaking to, I would look at a client like that and go, okay, well, their main focus with us over the next 3 to 6 months is to build a healthy lifestyle. Is to build the foundation that's going to allow them to scaffold on top of it. Because they can want to lose 5, 10, 15 kilos, but they're not going to do it unless they have this nice solid foundation. Because you just simply can't build on top of a foundation that isn't there. So if that foundation isn't there, clients will yo-yo and they'll naturally go round and round in circles trying to achieve the outcomes, but they haven't done the habitual lifestyle work that's essential at the start. So we focus a lot on that foundation building, and that is going to be a lot around basic habits, to be honest, like setting up their environment for success, focusing on food quality, meal preparation, reflection, having time in their week. All these basics, I personally find that once someone gets these basics laid out, and they're pretty simple basics inside a coaching lens, their self-talk will start to shift. They'll start to become more confident, more positive. They'll be able to adopt a growth mindset easier rather than always having a negative bias. And they'll start seeing physical results, which will then reinforce the work that they're doing to help them build that lifestyle as well. So you don't have to go in and do all the deep work and the shadow work at the start. You just have to focus on the basic stuff. And then you'll notice that self-esteem, confidence, self-worth, trust, follow through, compliance, all these things that as a coach we need from our clients, they will start to grow as well. So for us, it's about starting at that phase 1, that step 1, rather than going all coaching strategy of like, yes, high day, low day, calorie cycling, drop sets. Like you don't need all that. You need the foundation first. Otherwise, the work that you want to do and the fun stuff for coaches, none of it matters.
That's so good. I'm so glad that you said that. For you, how many, like with, especially your background with like really specific strength training and all this, that kind of stuff, for you, how many of the basic population really even needs, this is a really broad question, but needs to even dive in to a lot of the higher level strategies and tactics, like crazy levels of drop sets, supersets, calorie cycling, carb cycling. Like, I don't know about you, maybe it's just the population I serve, but I don't personally find that many people. Like most people can lose their 5 or 10 kilos from just the basics. But for those that are listening who think they're like, no, I have to do all the magic tricks. For you, do you find that many people that have to do all the magic tricks?
Speaking from experience, I used to think about this the complete wrong way too. I used to think it was a bigger percentage than what I realized. It's honestly like, if I had to guess, like what, 1-2% of the population. Obviously, your niche is going to be important to consider. Like if you work with high level bikini pros, even then, to be honest, but if you work with like high level bodybuilders, or if you're a sports specific coach, or if you're a rehab coach, then of course, like specificity and the small minor details become more important. However, if you're working with 99% of the population, I can guarantee you, if you put just as much focus and attention into setting the right goals with your clients as you do writing their training program, you'll get far better results and you'll be able to retain your clients longer because they will also learn what matters. So if you're obsessing over the small things, what do you think they're going to do? You want them to zoom out and actually focus on the low hanging fruit. That's what our job is as coaches. And I know there's a lot of conflict at the moment around like accountability. Everyone's like, oh, you don't need accountability. If you need accountability, you're lazy. Like, just do it for yourself. That is such an entitled thing to say for someone that has a lot of internal self-worth, internal confidence, and also for a lot of us coaches, external accountability. We don't have a business if we don't look after ourselves and show up. So we have to do it. Whereas most other people, they're trying to supplement this into their lifestyle and they're working really hard. And as coaches, if we're just focusing on all the small, minute things, or like being 50 calories within your target, like it doesn't matter. Like that's such a small, insignificant thing of what's actually going to get people results and help them stay with you for long enough to see the results and progress that they want. Because we all know it takes longer than what clients think.
Yeah, 100%. I love the fact that you said that. I feel like so many people who are, we'll just label like Gen Pop, or the majority of like your average Mrs. Jones with 3 kids who just wants to drop 20 pounds. Like that is it. I feel like too many people think that they have something wrong where I have to drop my calories to the magical 1200, or I have to calorie cycle or carb cycle, where it's so few people have to do that.
100%. And not even just Gen Pop, to be honest. I mean, we work with a lot of coaches themselves, a lot of personal trainers, a lot of people that are in the fitness space too. Where do you think they get their education from? You know what I mean? It's not just people that are, that don't know anything. Even the people that think they're more advanced than what they are, they need to still focus on the basics, in my opinion, because a lot of people just throw terminology around like progressive overload or mechanical tension or, training principles. They throw these things around, but do they apply them and do they know how to? Not necessarily. So even the people that think they matter, from my experience, I made the assumption at the start a lot of times that I was like, oh, wow, this person's a coach. They probably don't need these things, or this person's a personal trainer. They probably don't need those things. And I've been disproven almost always. So now, I just treat everyone regardless of what their experience is. We take them through the same assessment process. We treat everyone as like an individual, and we want to do them justice and make sure that we're assessing all levels of their health and fitness with an unbiased lens, regardless of like how they're coming into us or what they say in the nicest way. Show, don't tell, right? Like show me, don't tell me. Right. I think that's really important from a coaching lens, regardless of the person that's in front of you.
Mm-hmm. We have the same thing that happens over here. Like I work a lot with other coaches or therapists or other professionals in this space. And it's the exact same thing, where I almost find, I don't know, this may be just my experience, I almost find that it's even usually not just the other way around, but a more extreme version. Like I've had harder times in my case, like coaching other coaches or other professionals, because there's, I feel like almost a bigger gap where it's all about the other, like their clientele list, where it's even harder to apply it to them. But then imposter syndrome kicks in, and then guilt and shame. And now we're on this hamster wheel. That's just hard.
Yep, 100%. And I've had the same experience. And I think a lot of people listening to this that aren't like coaches themselves, they would never think that. But there's no disadvantage not having knowledge, right? Like sometimes ignorance is bliss. All you've got to do is show up and trust your coach and follow the plan, and have, motivators enough that's going to push you forward. If you can find those things, you can be successful and you can achieve the results that you want. But as you mentioned, when people come in with their own biases, maybe their own warped agenda of why they're doing what they're doing, maybe their motivators are for different reasons, or also they want some help, but they've still got that little bit of like, yeah, but I do know these things, and they don't come in with that learner's mentality. It actually makes it harder for those people to apply, which from my experience has been very true, because our most successful clients come in willing to learn, willing to be challenged, and willing to have their beliefs shifted, which is a really important part of coaching.
Kind of staying in this little pocket we're in, for the average person, forget like other coaches, for example, but for the average person that's like listening to this, who says that like, well, I know what to do, it's just not happening. Or I know the knowing doing gap is what I've always called it. How do you handle that? Like the person who goes, I know what to do, I know the habits, I know I should do all these things, I just can't bring myself to do it. What do you do with that?
Yeah, good question. So for me, for a lot of people at the start of their journey, a little bit of accountability goes a long way. And it's not accountability from like a negative frame. It's accountability to do the things they know that they should. And the analogy that I like to use that I have heard a few times is like the teeth brushing analogy. I don't know if you've heard of that, but basically like when you're a kid, and your mum tells you like brush your teeth. Like, go and brush your teeth. And you're like, no, mum, I don't want to. You're like, hate brushing my teeth. But you still go and brush your teeth, right? Because your mum's like, go and brush your teeth. And now as adults, right, thankfully, like the dentist is expensive. So we're all thankful for listening to mum. But, we couldn't think of not brushing our teeth now before we go to bed. It's such an ingrained part of who we are, and it's hygiene. It's a habit that we've adopted that we don't even think about. We couldn't even imagine not doing it. That's the way I like to explain to clients of what we want to do when it comes to both nutrition and training for them. Like we want it to become a part of your identity, a part of who you are, something that you don't need willpower to do. Now, I'm not saying that you won't need that at the start. Of course you will. Starting and building any new behavior or habit is messy. It's not linear. It's uncomfortable. It's ugly. They're going to fumble around, but that's the learning process. Anyone that's tried to learn a new language or learn a new skill or learn a new sport, neurologically how frustrating it is. And even for myself, I've started to learn how to do some snatches and some cleans and new exercises. And I'm like, wow, this is what it feels like to be a beginner, because I've been training for a long time. So, I could do all the movement patterns in my sleep nearly, and I've got a good strength base. But when it comes to moving fast, I'm so uncoordinated. But that's essentially what it's like when it comes to behavioral change. So going back to your question, but from a coaching lens, it's about firstly understanding that it's not easy for some people. It's actually quite challenging. Behavioral change is one of the most difficult things that we will ever do as humans. And especially if you're working with someone like in their late 30s, 40s, or 50s, you're literally trying to unwire and rewire decades of maybe poor behaviors or choices or habits that are so ingrained into their lifestyle they don't even think about doing it anymore. So you're coming in to intervene. A little bit of accountability in that instance goes a long way, but as I mentioned, when someone's not doing the obvious thing, there's only two reasons why. One, they don't know why they're doing it, and therefore it's not that important. So that comes back down to their motivators. And for me, I know when a client's going to come in and take action based on how powerful their motivators are. You bet that if a woman's showing up to do something to be a good role model for her kids and be a good mum, that's all the ammo we need to be like, great, we're going to remember how important this is. And we're going to remind you of that. And it's going to be uncomfortable. But these things are great opportunities and catalysts for change. And I think that's important as a coach to know those details about your client. That's the first thing. And then the second reason as to why someone wouldn't do the obvious thing is just because the step is too big. So if you're asking your client to track their entire day of food and they're not doing any of it, you've set them up for failure. Maybe you haven't taught them the basics. Maybe you haven't taught them how to organize their food for the day. Maybe you haven't taught them how to meal prep. Maybe you haven't even taught them how to use scales. The step is too big. So as coaches, we have to tell ourselves, if they're not doing the obvious things, something is getting in the way. And I have to break that step down for them, even if it feels so small and ridiculous for me. Of course, it should feel that way. You're the expert. But when you're working with someone new for the first time, you have to know that the obvious thing still feels hard. And to set people up for success, we have to make big things seem small, achievable, and 10 out of 10, I can do this. There's no reason, no excuse, nothing that could get in the way from me ticking off this tiny little action or habit for today. That's the way coaches need to, in my opinion, view coaching to coach behavioral change.
I think that's so good. And I think it even speaks volumes to those, let's say, that are listening to this that aren't working with a coach and they go, oh, that makes sense why I'm not doing my own actions, is my own step is too big. People can hear what Karen at the water cooler is doing. Like, oh, she's eating keto. I guess I should do keto. But going from eating like an asshole to like getting rid of every carb known to man, that's like that's so big. You know what I mean? But I think that's super big.
Yeah. And even when people talk about consistency, like everyone on the internet's like, just be consistent. But if I ask someone, what's that mean? Like, tell me what that means. What does that mean? Like most people fumble around and they're like, I guess just being consistent. Like you can't use the same word to describe the
circular definition.
Yeah. Like being consistent is doing something really small and boring for a long period of time, right? And the reason why most people struggle to be consistent is because it's underwhelming. It's like, oh, you mean I've got to brush my teeth every morning? You know, they're coming back to that same thing. But yes, like have protein with breakfast every morning. That's what it is to be consistent with that one tiny thing. And then we overload it just like a weight in the gym, right? We focus on getting stronger at it. So yes, for anyone that's listening that's not with the coach, it's about thinking, well, what's the big thing that I'm trying to work towards at the moment? Maybe it's improving my diet. What's the next most obvious, smallest step I could do that I know I should be doing? Like, what's the next smallest thing? And then I would encourage people to actually think about, does my environment support this behavioral change? Like, do I need to clean out the fridge? Do I need to have a chat with my husband about not bringing chocolate home? Like, how can I set my environment up to support my behavior and make the obvious thing easier? It's all these little things that a lot of people take for granted. And it's why we need so much willpower, so much discipline, and so much pushing to get small things done. It's just the handbrake's on, you know, and for most people, they need to look at what those handbrakes are.
Mm-hmm. I love the way that I've always framed it, and I love the way that you put that together and it very much aligns with what my community's heard me say is I think about a Venn diagram and think of what has the greatest ROI, return on investment, but also least amount of friction, and do what's in the middle. Like greatest ROI, least amount of friction. There's your next habit.
So. Yes, exactly. Yeah, really good. I love that.
For you, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, but you've alluded several times to talking about the identity. And it's one of the biggest things that I truly believe is what influences our actions, especially subconsciously, right? And if we are acting in, how to word this, if we're acting not in congruence with who we think we are, then there's always going to be misalignment and disconnect and sabotage and all this. So for you, when you're talking about like working through the identity and changing that, what's that look like from your perspective about that side of the fence? For clients or for personally? Well, either. I was meaning it more through the lens of like the average person listening to this, like a client, but also I'm curious personally too. So, yeah, I think the first thing that is important to acknowledge is a lot of people have never been asked reflective-based questions around their goals when they come into coaching, which is wild to me. But most people have never been asked, like, well, what sort of person do you want to become in the process? What does that mean to you? Why is that important? Like, why? Why? The 5 whys. Most people have never been asked those questions. And I'm always, like, surprised because, one, a lot of people won't know how to answer the questions, which is fair and reasonable. Like if you've never been asked these, they won't know the answers. But then 2, repetition is really important for these things because you're never going to ingrain anything that you've never thought about. So for most people, I think it actually is just becoming aware of a concept called identity-based goals or identity-based actions and doing some reading and research around what those things are. I know James Clear has some incredible stuff on this as well and in his book Atomic Habits, and he has heaps of free resources as well. You can find some really good research, but then also some digestible takeaways of what that actually means. And for me, understanding concepts is really important for buy-in. Personally, for me, I'm not doing anything that I don't believe is going to have a net positive outcome. I'm not going to. So when it comes to clients, if they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing as well, you're not going to get that buy-in, right? And the same for me, like I'm not doing anything. I know for motivation, if I really want to get motivated to do something, I need to truly understand why and how that's going to be helpful for me. So I'll usually go and do a lot of reading or research on a particular topic or method before I actually personally try it myself. So for anyone that's like listening, I think doing some research and reading on identity-based habits, actions, goals, etc., and truly understanding why that's important. And as you said, Jared, when it's a part of who we are, it's a non-negotiable. It's a part of who we are. We don't even think about it. It's like,
Well, I am that way, and therefore I do these actions. So we know that habitually, neurologically, it's easier to follow through, and we need less willpower. We give ourselves less choice and less flexibility because it's essentially just a core belief of who we are. So for me, it's about getting clients to first understand that concept, and then honestly, just some reflection-based work. So it's about like, what's the goal you want to achieve? Like, what's the outcome? Like, what do you physically want to achieve? Maybe it is fat loss. Maybe it's building muscle, building strength. Maybe it's building a healthy lifestyle. Like, what's the thing you need to see? And now, why is that truly important to you? Like, what part of your identity is this supporting? And that's where we were referring to earlier. But common ones is like, I want to be a really good role model for my kids. Or like, I want to put my own oxygen mask on first because I'm giving myself to everyone at work and I'm burning out. Like they start to come around to these identities. Like, I want to be someone that's fit and healthy and strong, or I don't want to go down the same pathway as my parents, and I want to have generational health. Like, all these things are such powerful motivators that intrinsically can attach to our identity and become the person that we are. Now, for coaches and personal trainers, the reason why this is easier is because it's attached to your job title, which is attached to your identity. Sure. It's a little bit different, but for your everyday person that, you've got a normal job, fitness is something you need to be doing, and maybe you don't love it and you're not passionate about it. That's okay. You don't have to be. You really don't have to be. But you have to be passionate and love and be obsessed with the person that you want to be. And I think that's possible for everyone. Like, obsess over being a positive role model for your kids. Obsess over being the one in the friendship group that looks after themselves and that is reliable and is someone that they can lean on, being that good friend, that good supportive person. So that identity is much deeper, but the smallest step for people that they can take is just to do some reading and do some journaling reflection questions about it, which is what we encourage people to do. Like, get curious about that. What does it look like? Think about it. Write it down on paper. Make it come to life. Speak about it with someone. That's always going to be the best place to start.
That's huge. I think so few people reflect on things. It's unreal, right? Like, it's I think it's one of the biggest things. It's one of the things that I say a lot and it aligns perfectly with this is when setting goals or trying to figure out what it is we want or someone wants. It's not how do I get, but it's who do I have to become that gets. Not how do I lose 30 pounds? Who do I have to become who loses 30 pounds? But that applies everywhere. Like, my kids won't behave. Instead of saying, how do I get my kids to behave? It's who do I have to become that gets their kids to behave, right? I think everything is the answer is through the lens of the version that you're trying to become who gets that thing as a byproduct.
Yep, completely agree.
So little bit different direction for you. And this is one thing I was wanting to chat about. I think in the space, especially a lot of the times as someone gets a little bit more intellectual about this stuff, like the person that's always researching or they've tried all the things, is like the word optimal gets thrown around a lot. It's any more like a buzzword, but I don't know if you feel like this or not, but like the way that I view is like, if optimal is not practical, then it's no longer optimal, right? Like, who cares if you have the most optimal plan in the world? If you're not going to fucking do it, you're not going to fucking do it, right? So for you, where's the balance though? Because I feel like anything good has a dichotomy. Like, if there's let's say on the far side over here, we have optimal as hell. Like, it is the most optimal, but it's not practical, right? You never do it. But over here, you have the plan that you love and it is so practical, but it has zero ROI and it's not doing anything. It's like the people that drink a certain temperatured water for fat loss. Like, it's not going to do anything. For you, where is that dichotomy of optimal meets practicality and things like that?
Yeah, I feel like you're trying to butter me up on this one, Jared. Surely you've seen some content that I've done on this.
You're right. I have, but my audience hasn't. So
no, I was like, oh, this is not a coincidence. It's a really good point, Jared, because as you know, like, a lot of people do throw around terminology of like what's optimal, optimize X, Y, and Z. Buzzwords like biohacking and wearables and all of these things have made anyone an expert, essentially, but they're not assessing the data. They're reading the data of what things are being told. And it's the same with, obviously, social media has a lot of good and a lot of positive, and it allows everyone to have a voice, but then it also allows everyone to have a voice. So, it's interesting to, sit back and watch, because one thing I'm really big on is that if you understand principles and how things work, you don't really need protocols and methods, right? Because protocols and methods are just principles simplified, right? If we talk principles like calories in, calories out, or energy balance, or principles of progressive overload, or strength and conditioning programming. Like if we took these sound principles that we all know are true and backed with evidence, people make their own protocols and methods off them, right? To make them easier, more digestible, more fun, more clicky, right? And we see that a lot with nutrition, right? When it comes to like keto and other methods as well that people like to use. So for me, it's about, for clients, just understanding that there is no secret answer out there. Like there is no best method or best approach. It's all going to be context dependent on the individual in front of you. And for coaches and personal trainers, it's about understanding that what works for you will not work for your clients, most likely. Like most coaches, they don't understand this, but they're usually 5 to 10 years ahead of their clients or niche that they're working with. So you have to remember what you were doing 5 or 10 years ago and what methods and approaches that you were taking. And if everything moves at the pace that it does, it was probably completely unoptimal in comparison to what you're doing now. So I've shifted my beliefs on this a lot because I love optimizing things. I love it. I love biohacking. Don't even get me wrong. I love all those things, but I also understand the weight that they hold and how much they actually equate to the result that I want. And for the majority of people, and even for myself, they are for the 1%ers. And the 1%ers are for 1%ers, in my opinion. So for the majority of the world, honestly, they just struggle with, as we've spoken about, doing and following through on the things that they know they should be doing. Obsessing over like the perfect shoulder press angle or like the exact amount of carbs after training or post-workout nutrition, like obsessing over these things. And in my opinion, even making content on it. Like part of me is like, are these the problems that we're trying to fix in the world? I don't know. Like I said, my perspective shapes a lot of that, of what I think is important. And I obviously, have my own biased beliefs and everyone has their own niche and audience. But from my opinion, the people that I speak to, the messages need to be more deeper than that, more intellectual than that, more understanding about principles and empowering the client or the consumer to understand for themselves so they can make an informed decision about what's optimal for them or what's best for them, rather than, focusing so much attention towards something that just essentially doesn't matter for the majority of people.
Yeah, completely. Like, whether it be like grown men arguing on Instagram, like whether you want like a 45-degree angle or a 43-degree angle on your lat puller. I've never understood it or like it.
No.
So
you've just got to laugh though sometimes, don't you, Jared? I'm like, I just don't have the bandwidth for this right now. I've just got so many other problems.
It's wild. Like people still think carbs store fat. I don't think we're needing to talk about what degree of humeral rotation we need. I'm just happy if they pull the bar to their chest. Like that's like if we squeeze our shoulder blades at some point, I'm happy.
Yeah, but we also wonder why we're in this epidemic at the moment of coaches having imposter syndrome. Like all these things as well, they just contribute to the noise. And what people need to realize is there is so much information out there. Your job as a coach is not to give them more information. It's actually to give them exactly what they need right now. Nothing more, nothing less, because you'll overwhelm people. And in the same lens, like if you're someone that gets overwhelmed, you're probably just looking at too much information. You need to narrow your focus and be like, what matters the most? And then you need to block out the rest of the noise because it's noisy out there and it's only going to get louder as well. Like as social media becomes a normal part of our life and a normal part of business as well, I think it's only going to lead to more confusion. So unfortunately, it's only going to get worse before it gets better.
And you're to that point for the people listening where they're like, I follow all these different people and every person thinks the other person's a dumbass and this person's contradicting that person. And I just don't know who to follow or who to trust. And everyone has results. Everyone's whatever. So for the average person listening to this, how does Sharelle think everyone should navigate social media in like the fitnessy weight loss transformation space? Because like I also see it from like the consumer side of it. They're just trying to they're just trying, right? I think most people are purely just doing their best, trying to figure this out, and they're getting burned. I hate how many times people are getting burned in the process, right? Like I think you just made a post and I totally resonate with it about someone's coaching experience led to someone having to go to therapy for it. And like we have to undo like a ton of people's baggage because this coach basically gave them an eating disorder or whatever. So how does the average person approach social media in your opinion?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, it's also new in this day and age of, social media is so relatively new. So I don't think anyone really has the answers. But For me, when I think about these things and from like a coaching lens, coaching or even following or subscribing to someone, you're essentially signing up to have their beliefs, their opinions, their knowledge, their understanding, and essentially the way they see the world. And that's okay. We all follow people that we know we don't believe what they do. We dislike them, right? So we follow them. But it's about understanding that. Like before you hit the follow button or before you sign up with a coach, like, do you love what they're about? Like, do you believe their values? Do you have trust in them? And I think they say now, like the average person takes 9 to 10 like convictions before they buy or do something anyway. So I don't think that most people are being like, I like this person, buy. I think they're naturally watching for a while. And I know personally, some people before they start coaching with us have been on the fence for years just watching. And I'm like, God, you know, they've listened to every podcast, they've done their research, they know more about me than I know about myself.
It's scary.
And I'm like, okay, that is my dog's name. But also I think that's smart. You know, I think if someone has nothing to hide, they'll have a podcast or a YouTube or they'll do long form, in my opinion. They won't just create short form content. And I think that, in my opinion, is a bit of a red flag. If a creator or a coach or an influencer only does short form and they're selling a service, I would just be wary of that. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, but for me and for a lot of people that even we have come into our community, they've done their research and therefore they know exactly what they're signing up for. They know exactly what we're about and what we're not about. And when you're working with someone, that's so important. So for me, it's about remove your need to learn from Instagram and short form. You will learn nothing much off a reel that's under a minute. I can guarantee you, because you need to shift yourself to something like podcasts or YouTubes. You know, there's a reason why uni degrees are like 4 years and you've got to sit in lectures for hours. It's because learning needs to be sequenced in the right way. It's not just about consuming information. You know, it's about learning things in the right order. So for me, it's just like, yes, use your social media for quick tips, for hacks, all of those things to find people. But then if you're like, hey, I really like Jared's content, I really love what he's doing over here, shift over to the podcast or shift over to YouTube to really understand what Jared's about, what he isn't about, how he approaches things, his methods, and essentially his values. Like that's what I personally do. And that's what I would encourage anyone to do before they fully invest in someone financially or emotionally as well. Like if you're investing in being like, I believe everything Sharelle says, like, please don't. I'm going to change my opinion on things over time.
Right. I would hope so.
I think the intent is the main thing. You know, of course, there are a lot of people out there that have poor intent, why they do what they do, but you'll sniff that out real quick if you listen to them on a podcast. So I think it's just about doing your research and, you know, taking things with a grain of salt.
I love that answer. That's so good. Okay, last big question, and then we'll get to the fun wrap up stuff. So for you, aside from like the normal, like, oh, be more consistent, be more disciplined, calorie deficit, all that like normal surface level stuff, for you, what are some of the less talked about reasons, in your opinion, as to why so many people can't get to where they want to be?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's unfortunate, but I think for me, the biggest obvious one is just our upbringing. You know what I mean? I think our first early years of life, like our first, you know, they say our first 3 years are the most impressionable years of our life. But I think, you know, our first decade of life up to 10, like the environment we get to grow up in, our own personal privileges, you know, whether we grew up with a loving relationship, loving parents, loving support, money, feeling safe, feeling secure, friendships, whether we got bullied at school, you know, whether our first boyfriend cheated on us or not, like all these things that people laugh about and they're great stories, they actually impact our decisions later in life a lot more than I think what most people recognize or understand. Because I don't like to use the word trauma or anything like, you know, and make it too serious, but we all have responses to the way that we show up and do things, whether it's leaving someone on scene and choosing not to reply to them. Like we're essentially just running away because we're worried about what they're going to do. You know, we don't want to let them down, you know, or whatever it might be. I think these things affect us a lot. And you would absolutely see this inside coaching, but we have a lot of clients that they don't want to let us down and they feel so bad and I've let Sharelle down. and this I don't know, this deflation of how they see an authority figure, it says a lot, about that person and how they essentially want behavioral change. So I think really understanding that we all have these, and it's neither right or wrong, it's just a difference in our upbringing. It really affects confidence and self-esteem in a lot of people. And a lot of people are like, oh, you're so confident, you just say it how it is. And I'm like, I've been pretty privileged, with my upbringing. I haven't been bullied in school. I've never been really overweight. I've always had that high level of self-esteem. And yes, it's always been a work in progress, but I'm not going to pretend that I came from a different privilege. We all have our own privileges. So for me, it's about understanding that everyone has their own set of stuff that they're working through. And it affects a lot of how we eat, how we fuel our bodies, how we move, whether we prioritize ourselves, self-care, and whether we put others first or our own needs. It actually influences a lot of things. So a lot of people don't speak about that because it's deep and a lot of people don't understand it. And honestly, it probably should be saved for therapy, not coaching as well. But I think understanding that those things are really impactful in just the small habits and behaviors that clients do.
I would totally agree with that. And what's funny is because I always say that coaching is not therapy, right? But I also, and I, as someone who coaches a lot of therapists, I've asked them this, and this is, I think, another big area of the issue. And I was actually wanting to get my therapist on the show because I think that would be really cool, but there's HIPAA laws and she can't, but that's aside the point. But I feel like there's this giant gray area of if we have all these major things that's affecting their results, let's say in a coaching dynamic, but we can't talk about any of it till therapy. I feel like there's a lot of people that aren't getting what they need. But after talking with several of the people, like my therapist, and then honest to God, I work with a lot of therapists. It's pretty cool, kind of it came full circle. But there's a lot of this stuff that I'm told in the therapy education world that there's not a lot of stuff around trauma responses and all these different things to when weight loss is the issue, going to Weight Watchers meetings with mom at 6, or, oh, my mom gave me a half of her diet pills when I was 9. There's not as much around that. So there's this gap that's missing. That's my biggest ick, if you will. There's this huge gap. There's no one's getting help right here. But
yeah, I completely agree. And one thing that, we do a lot of in the coaching space is we do have a big mindset component of what we do. Yeah. It's obviously very different to therapy, but it's a lot more of the gentle mindset work. But one thing I think that a lot of people just get so much value from is being in a safe space, a really safe space with other women or other men or other people that they relate to, and seeing them raise the standard for themselves. And we do a lot of this in group coaching call spaces, but essentially when you're in a room with other women that you resonate and relate to that are maybe a couple of steps just ahead of you, not too far ahead, because a coach is, like I said, 10 years too far. If you're in a room with someone that's you know what, they've been consistent and they've been at it for, a couple of years now, and look at them, they're crushing it. I'm so inspired to be better, to be like that. It's role modeling, and it's so powerful, and it makes us feel safe. It makes us feel supported, especially in a judgment-free environment. Those are really gentle ways that we can help people grow, and we have this in friendship groups, but unfortunately not a lot of people do. Some friendship groups are quite toxic. So you don't want to show up and have a growth mindset and own those behaviors. So yeah, finding circles and pockets like that is essentially a life hack to make that easier without, obviously, like you said, therapy is very different, but that also provides a safe space for you to do on a personal level.
I love all of that. Sharelle, this has been so good. I've loved every second of this. Now, one of the things that I'm starting to do on my episodes that I like to do is towards the end, I like to do these 3 rapid fire kind of questions that are very it doesn't have to be about weight loss or fitness or whatever. This is just more getting into the brain of Sharelle kind of vibes. So first question, what is the best life advice you have ever been given?
Oh, the best life advice I've ever. I feel pressured. Let me have a think.
Yeah. Okay, let's just let's say what's one of the best pieces of life advice that you've ever been given that's resonated so much with you?
I think for me, it's not been one thread of advice that I've just been told once, but it's something that I see very true in the world. And it's just essentially showing up as you are and always being yourself. showing up. Everyone says it's like authenticity, right? Like being authentic, but a lot of people say it, but they don't really practice it or know what it means. And being authentic and showing up as myself has actually served me really well, because yes, it's uncomfortable. And, you know, there's absolutely been periods where I've copped criticism and hate for having certain opinions or doing things that I wanted to, or even, you know, being vulnerable at times and it hurting you, you know, sort of like it going against you. So I've definitely had those things, but what it's actually taught me on like a subconscious level is that it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to speak, and it's okay to have an opinion, even if other people don't agree with you. And one of my big principles and values is saying things openly that I believe in that everyone else is too scared to say. So sharing my beliefs, even if other people don't want to hear it. For me, being able to say those things has, you know, it's helped me pave the path that I have, but it also gives me a lot of intrinsic confidence, because no one can hold anything against me. Like, I am who I am. And if someone doesn't like that, that's okay. I'm not offended. We can still be respectful to each other and not have the same opinions and not even like each other. And that's also okay. So I've had a lot of mentors in my corner that have helped me build that mindset of being like, no, like back yourself. If that's your belief and that's your opinion and your intent is good, that's okay. Share it, say it openly, be public about it. You're okay to do that. You're safe enough to do that. You know, and I've always felt it's supported to share my opinion. So for me, that's mine. Sorry, that was a long one. That was
no, I love that. I love that. No, that's incredible. Okay, question 2. If you could put anything on a billboard the entire world would see, what would you put on that billboard? That's not a landing page. That's like, go.
One line that we use in the women's health movement is, we promise to empower you to see your worth. And that's something that is at the backbone of a lot of what we do, because we're not here to tell you that you're doing an amazing job. And we're not here to, you know, be like, boast you up and say, you're doing incredible, keep going. Like, we're not a hype girl for you. We want to empower people to see their own worth, because we believe that if people can empower themselves and see that, and it's not because of anyone else, and they came to those reflections on their own, they're going to be more likely to hold those changes for the rest of their life and build that confidence and self-esteem that's going to allow them to put themselves first, to choose foods that align with their goals, and to exercise and meditate and everything else we know we should be doing. So that's the first one that come up for me, is just empowering yourself to see your worth. That's awesome. And last one, what's something that you have recently changed your mind on? Ooh, I think it's a good, Jared. Great job. Something I've recently changed my mind on. Well, I think over the last, I don't know if this is recent, but over the last probably 1 to 2 years, I think my beliefs around coaching have changed a lot in terms of what's important. And we've touched on a lot of these things already inside the podcast. But for me, like, I used to think, you know, like the perfect training program, or, you know, the perfect diet, or the perfect meal plan, or the perfect client, or the perfect coach, like all these perfects sort of existed. And essentially it was the big overriding theme of coming back to the basics always. And we know it, like a lot of us intellectually know it, but some lessons we have to learn through experience. And I think for me, it's just being reminded time and time again of the work that I'm actually doing and what we actually do as coaches, and what coaching practices are worth investing more money, energy and time into, and what aren't. And even like as a business, you know, we've invested more money into more of the personal development side of things, and educating and upskilling our coaches' level of self-awareness, and being able to communicate both in person and digitally, versus, okay, well, what about the perfect training program? You know, I think a lot of coaches put a lot of money into that sort of stuff, is nutrition and training, which is important. But then once you've done the basics and once you understand the concepts over there, communication, understanding, soft skills is something that's incredibly hard to teach, but it really does separate coaches in the industry.
Yeah, so. Totally. That's awesome. This has been so good. I thank you so much for coming on. This has been amazing. Now, where can people find you, learn more about your platform, your app, talk about all that stuff?
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Thanks so much for having me. It's been fun. I always love, talking about coaching and sharing a little bit about what we do. But if you're looking for more about coaching with us, our business is called the Women's Health Movement, and essentially, everything we've spoken about today is what we do. We do coaching for women, and then we also have a training-based subscription app too, as well. So if coaching isn't your thing and you don't want that much accountability and support, we've also got a training subscription as well that you can sign up to. But essentially, the Women's Health Movement, you can just search that anywhere. Honestly, it'll come up: websites, TikTok, Instagram, and then for my own personal page, it's just my name. So Sharelle Grant. There's only one of me, thankfully.
Awesome. I'll be sure to put all that in the show notes and everything. But awesome, Sharelle. Thank you again so much for doing this. This has been awesome. So
my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jared.
Of course.